TMJ and the Richardsons, two names that ruled Glasgow's criminal underworld. When their rivalry spilled into the crowd of an Oasis concert, the city witnessed a brutal attack that was more than violence. It was a public warning. What began as music and celebration ended in blood, fear, and a war that scarred Scotland's streets forever. The summer air in Glasgow carried an unusual buzz as fans from all over Scotland gathered for what promised to be one of the biggest nights of the year. Oasis was at the peak of their fame, and the concert was more than just a performance. It was a cultural event. People had queued outside the venue since early morning, clutching tickets, posters, and merchandise, desperate to get the best view of their idols. The streets surrounding the arena were crowded with laughter, drinks, and chants of the band's name. To many, it felt like a once-in-a-lifetime chance to see their heroes play live. Inside the arena, the energy was electric. Every seat was filled, and the floor was a moving sea of excitement. The crowd erupted when the first lights flickered on the stage, screaming in anticipation. The sound of guitars tuning sent waves of euphoria through the audience. Couples hugged, friends shouted over the noise, and strangers bonded instantly over their shared love for the music. In that moment, the concert was pure escapism, a break from the daily struggles of life in the city. For thousands, the night was about joy, nostalgia, and escape. But among the loyal fans, others had arrived with a very different purpose. Blended into the crowd were groups of young men who stood apart in small clusters. They weren't interested in the stage or the songs. Their eyes scanned the audience, sharp and calculated. They wore the same casual clothes as everyone else, jeans, trainers, and jackets, but their body language betrayed them. They didn't cheer, they didn't laugh, and they certainly weren't there for the music. These men carried the weight of something darker, a mission carefully planned in advance. For weeks, whispers had spread through Glasgow's criminal underworld about a brewing confrontation. Rivalries between gangs had intensified, and there was talk of a public show of strength. Few believed that such violence could spill into a concert attended by thousands. But those in the know understood that this was exactly what made it the perfect stage. With so many bodies packed tightly together, the attackers could slip in and out unnoticed. The noise, the chaos, and the sheer size of the event meant that no one would be able to follow every movement. As the lights dimmed and the roar of the crowd reached deafening levels, tension thickened for those who weren't there for the music. The gangs had been waiting for this moment, blending into the frenzy as if they belonged. While ordinary fans lost themselves in anticipation, a small circle of men exchanged brief glances, signaling that the time was near. The energy in the air meant two very different things depending on who felt it. For the fans, it was excitement and happiness. For the hidden mobsters, it was adrenaline and calculation. The stage was set for two performances that night. One was by Oasis, delivering the soundtrack of a generation. The other was silent, violent, and carefully staged in the shadows of the celebration. The crowd had no idea that what began as a night of music would soon descend into fear and chaos, leaving scars far deeper than anyone could have imagined. For decades, the streets of Glasgow had been a battlefield for control, not with guns blazing in the open, but with calculated strikes, whispered threats, and sudden disappearances. The city had always carried a reputation for toughness, but beneath its working-class pride and resilience ran a darker current. At the heart of this underworld were two names whispered with both fear and respect: the TMJ crew and the Richardson. These groups weren't just collections of petty criminals, they were empires built on drugs, intimidation, and influence, and their rivalry stretched back years. The TMJ crew rose from Glasgow's East End, hardened by poverty and shaped by survival. They operated with ruthless efficiency, running heroin and cocaine through council estates, turning addiction into profit. Their leaders were known for being young, ambitious, and brutally violent when crossed. Loyalty within their ranks was enforced not by promises but by fear, ensuring no one dared step out of line. By the mid-1990s, they had built a reputation that made even hardened criminals tread carefully in their territory. The Richardsons, on the other hand, carried an older legacy. They weren't just street dealers. They were businessmen in the shadows, operating with a calculated precision that came from years of dominance. Their empire stretched across pubs, clubs, and shipping routes that brought drugs into the city. Where the TMJ relied on raw violence, the Richardsons relied on networks, money, and influence. They knew police officers by name, had judges who owed them favors, and possessed connections that reached far beyond Glasgow. Their strength came from being untouchable, or at least appearing that way. But no empire lasts unchallenged. Trouble started when shipments began to disappear, trucks carrying high-value drugs never reaching their intended destination. Whispers placed the blame squarely on the TMJ crew, eager to chip away at the Richardson family's dominance. The Richardsons in turn retaliated quietly at first, torching cars and sending warnings through the usual channels. But the thefts didn't stop. Instead, the attacks grew bolder, with TMJ associates boasting openly that the old guard was losing its grip. In the underworld, disrespect was just as dangerous as debt. A stolen package could be forgiven, if paid back, but humiliation, that demanded blood. The Richardsons could not allow young upstarts to mock them publicly without consequence. The TMJ, equally, couldn't afford to retreat, because backing down meant weakness, and weakness was fatal in a city where predators circled constantly. What began as a business dispute quickly evolved into a personal vendetta. The concert became the perfect opportunity to escalate the conflict. The TMJ wanted to show that the Richardsons' men weren't safe anywhere. Not in clubs, not in bars, and not even in front of thousands of innocent people. A strike in public would be a humiliation broadcast across the city without a single newspaper needing to print a word. Everyone in Glasgow's underworld lived on rumor, and a single attack could spread faster than fire. As fans queued for Oasis tickets, neither group cared about the music. For them, it was a chessboard. And on this night, a pawn was about to be sacrificed so that the message could be sent. The war wasn't in the shadows anymore. It was in the open. The Oasis concert wasn't just another gig, it was a massive cultural moment. The kind of event where the city seemed to pause. Newspapers wrote about it, radios played non-stop advertisements, and ticket scalpers charged triple outside the arena. Everyone wanted to be there. And for that very reason, it became the perfect place to blend in. To ordinary fans, the huge crowds meant energy and excitement. To the men plotting violence, it meant camouflage. The venue was packed shoulder to shoulder, thousands of people crammed together, all focused on the same stage. Security patrolled, but their task was impossible. They were hired to stop drunken brawls or smuggled booze, not to police a gangland feud. Bags weren't searched thoroughly, and in the chaos of entry, no one noticed small blades, broken bottles, or makeshift weapons hidden in jackets. The attackers knew this and had planned carefully. Every detail was designed to make sure they could move in, strike, and slip away without ever being caught. For weeks, whispers had circled through pubs and pool halls about a public show of strength. The TMJ crew had decided that nothing would send a clearer message than an attack carried out in the middle of a massive crowd. It wasn't just about hurting one man. It was about humiliation. They wanted the Richardsons to know that their reach didn't extend far enough to protect their own. By striking during the concert, they guaranteed maximum exposure. Thousands of witnesses would spread the story afterward, their shock and fear amplifying the impact. It was theater, and the stage was perfect. From the moment the doors opened, scouts moved inside, watching carefully. They identified the target almost immediately, a young Richardson associate dressed loudly, flashing jewelry, laughing with friends near the front. He was exactly where they expected him to be, soaking up attention and showing off his connections. To TMJ, he represented arrogance, the kind that had to be punished. His presence at such a public event was reckless, and they intended to take full advantage. The beauty of the plan lay in the noise. Oasis concerts were infamous for their deafening crowds. Voices raised in chants and songs that drowned out everything else. Shouts, screams, even the sound of breaking glass could disappear into the roar. The attackers knew that when the band started playing, The chaos would provide all the cover they needed. Even if someone saw what happened, their words would be swallowed by the sheer confusion of the moment. As the arena filled, the atmosphere grew thick with anticipation. To the fans, it was the familiar thrill before a band appeared on stage. To the hidden mobsters, it was the signal that the clock had started ticking. Each one of them carried themselves with careful control, their expressions blank as they mingled among strangers. To anyone looking, they were just another group of young men waiting for a show. When the lights finally began to dim and the crowd erupted in cheers, the attackers exchanged the faintest of looks. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The perfect cover had arrived, and soon the noise and frenzy of the concert would hide the brutality about to unfold. He had been warned before, but warnings rarely mattered to young men who felt untouchable. The Richardson's associate had grown up around money, crime, and influence. He wasn't a high-ranking player in the organization, but his last name and his connections gave him the arrogance of someone who believed he was invincible. That night, he strutted into the Oasis concert as though it were his private party. Expensive trainers, gold chains and a designer jacket made him stand out among the crowd of ordinary fans. He wanted to be noticed, and he was. Unfortunately for him, the wrong eyes were watching. To the Richardson family, he was a symbol of their power, flashy, bold, and unafraid of the TMJ crew. He spent his nights in popular bars, drinking heavily and boasting about his family's dominance in Glasgow. Rumors spread of him mocking the younger TMJ members, calling them desperate and reckless. Some said he even laughed about the stolen shipments, claiming the Richardsons let the East End boys keep scraps to feel important. Whether or not he truly said it didn't matter. In the Underworld, perception was everything, and the TMJ couldn't ignore the disrespect. The concert made him an easy target. Unlike the cautious elders of the Richardson family, who kept their movements quiet and private, the younger generation lived for attention. This particular associate enjoyed being recognized, surrounding himself with friends and women, flaunting his links to one of the most feared families in Scotland. By being so visible, he was exposing himself to TMJ. Striking him would be the perfect way to wound the family's pride without immediately igniting a full-scale war. He wasn't a boss, but he carried their name, and bringing him down in such a public way would humiliate them. As he pushed his way toward the front of the crowd, his confidence only grew. He ordered drinks for his goo, laughed loudly and gestured with a bravado that made heads turn. To ordinary concert-goers, he was just another young man enjoying himself. But to the men who had slipped in with a different mission, he was glowing like a beacon in the dark. Every move he made confirmed what they already knew. This was the moment to strike. The attackers positioned themselves carefully. Two stood behind him, blending into the restless crowd, while another circled closer from the side. They didn't need words. The plan had been rehearsed in silence, each man knowing his role. When the music started, the lights would dim just enough to cast shadows. The noise would drown every sound. The Richardson associate had no idea that while he enjoyed his drink and sang along to the chants of the crowd, he had been surrounded. What made the moment chilling was how ordinary it appeared. To anyone nearby, he looked like he was just having fun, caught in the excitement of one of the biggest nights of the year. No one noticed the subtle movements of the men around him. No one felt the shift in the air as tension grew. In a matter of minutes, he would go from the loudest man in the room to the most vulnerable, and the message his attackers wanted to send would be written in blood, not words. The opening chords crashed through the speakers, and the arena shook with the roar of thousands. Lights swept across the crowd, blinding flashes that sent fans into a frenzy. In that chaos, the Richardson associate lifted his drink and shouted along with the first lyrics, completely unaware that he was seconds away from being pulled into something far darker than the music. To most, the sound was pure ecstasy. To a small group of men in the middle of the floor, it was cover. The TMJ attackers had been waiting for this exact moment, and now they moved with precision. The first strike was sudden, fast, and almost invisible. A hand gripped the back of the Richardson associate's neck, yanking him off balance. Before he could react, another fist smashed into his ribs, forcing the air from his lungs. He stumbled, still thinking it was just a drunken shove, but then the glint of a blade flashed in the concert lights. Panic flickered in his eyes. By the time realization struck, the crowd was already shifting violently around him, pulled by the ripple of bodies pressing closer to the stage. No one realized that what was happening wasn't a drunken scuffle. It was a targeted ambush. The attackers swarmed him with brutal efficiency. One man drove a jagged bottle into his side, while another smashed a fist into his face, splitting his lip open. He tried to shout, but the music swallowed his cries. His friends, drunk and distracted, reacted too slowly, and when they tried to intervene, the attackers lashed out at them too. Bottles cracked, elbows flew, and the surge of violence spread confusion through the crowd. Fans screamed, unsure whether it was part of the madness of the gig or something far more sinister. What made the scene so terrifying was how quickly it escalated. Within seconds, the Richardson associate was on the ground, trampled by feet, kicked from all directions. His arms tried to shield his head, but the blows came relentlessly. One attacker drove a knife down into his leg. Another stamped his foot on his chest with crushing force. He writhed helplessly, drenched in his own blood, while above him the arena thundered with the sound of Oasis and the crowd still cheering as though nothing was wrong. Security tried to push through, but the mass of bodies made it nearly impossible. Every second that passed gave the attackers more time. They knew they couldn't kill him outright without risking being dragged down themselves, but they wanted him broken, humiliated, and scarred. They wanted him alive enough to tell the story later, to show his family that their power couldn't shield him from violence in the heart of the city. With one final stomp, they melted back into the chaos, slipping between dancing fans who were too lost in the music to notice the blood on their shoes. When security finally reached the scene, they found him barely conscious, his face battered beyond recognition, his clothes torn and soaked crimson. Friends shouted for help, but the attackers were gone, dissolved into the sea of thousands. The brutal message had been delivered, and by the time the lights rose at the end of the concert, whispers had already begun spreading. Something far worse than a fight had just taken place, and everyone who saw it knew this was no random act of violence. It was a warning, delivered in the cruelest way possible. The news of the attack rippled through the venue long before the concert ended. At first it was just a pocket of panic, a cluster of fans pushing outward, shouting that someone had been stabbed. Security radios crackled with conflicting messages, but the music drowned most of it out. On stage, the band played on, oblivious to the chaos spreading in the shadows. To those in the front rows, it was impossible to tell if the surge of movement was excitement or terror. The confusion worked perfectly for the attackers. By the time ushers and guards forced their way through the mass of bodies, the men responsible had already vanished, swallowed by the crowd as if they had never been there. The victim lay crumpled on the sticky floor, his blood mixing with spilled beer. His friends shouted frantically, waving their arms for help, but their voices were little more than background noise against the roar of thousands singing in unison. When medics finally reached him, the sight was gruesome, his face a swollen mess, his body riddled with cuts, and his leg bleeding heavily from a deep stab wound. They lifted him quickly, shielding him with jackets as they tried to move through the wall of people. Fans gasped when they caught sight of the blood, some screaming, others pushing desperately to get away. What had been a night of celebration was now sliding into fear. Words spread like wildfire. Strangers whispered to each other in disbelief. Someone had been attacked, someone had been stabbed, someone might even be dead. No one knew the full story, but everyone felt the shift in atmosphere. The cheering grew fractured, replaced in parts by anxious murmurs. Parents pulled their children closer, groups of friends debated leaving early, and some fans forced their way to the exits. But even as the rumors spread, most people stayed quiet. They didn't want to get involved, and more importantly, they were afraid of what it meant if the whispers were true. The silence was chilling. In Glasgow, everyone knew the rules of the underworld. If violence broke out, especially something that looked planned, It was almost always tied to gangs. Witnessing such acts meant carrying dangerous knowledge, and talking about it meant painting a target on your own back. People might gossip to each other in hushed tones, but when police came with questions, memories became foggy. No one saw faces. No one recognized anyone. No one remembered exactly what happened. It was easier and safer to say nothing at all. By the time the final song rang out and the band left the stage, the damage had already been done. The victim was rushed to hospital under heavy guard, his condition uncertain. Outside the venue, police cars lined the streets, their lights flashing blue against the night sky. Reporters gathered quickly, snapping photos of fans leaving with fear etched across their faces. But despite the visible presence of law enforcement, there was an unspoken understanding among those who knew the city's darker side. This wasn't the end. The attack wasn't just about one man. It was a challenge, a public slap in the face to one of Glasgow's most powerful families. Inside pubs and clubs that night, the story grew with every retelling. Some claimed dozens were involved. Others swore they saw guns. The details changed with each version, but the core remained the same. A Richardson associate had been brutally attacked in the middle of an Oasis concert, and no one had dared to stop it. That silence, the refusal to speak, the decision to turn away wasn't just fear, it was respect for the brutal order of Glasgow's underworld, where the wrong word could cost a life. The attack at the concert spread across Glasgow faster than any newspaper could report it. By the time dawn broke, story had already reached the Richardson family in their West End strongholds. Their associate had survived, though barely, and his injuries left no doubt about the intent behind the assault. He was beaten, stabbed, and left humiliated in front of thousands. The message was crystal clear. The TMJ crew wanted everyone to know that the Richardsons were vulnerable. For a family that thrived on fear and respect, such public embarrassment was more dangerous than the wounds themselves. The Richardsons gathered quickly, their meetings held behind closed doors in pubs and safe houses. Rage filled the air. Allowing such an insult to go unanswered would tarnish their reputation. If people began to believe the Richardsons couldn't protect their own, their empire would crumble piece by piece. Drug runners, dealers, and even allies would start shifting their loyalties to TMJ, sensing weakness. In the underworld, loyalty was fluid, always tied to strength, and right now, it looked as though the Richardsons were slipping. Retaliation wasn't a matter of if, but when. Rumors spread that cars belonging to TMJ members were torched in the dead of night, windows smashed in quiet streets, families woken by the sudden roar of fire. Whispers in pubs hinted at worse, men disappearing, dragged into vans and never seen again. Whether these stories were true or exaggerated didn't matter. What mattered was the atmosphere of fear. The Richardsons wanted the city to know they were striking back, even if no one could prove it. TMJ, however, didn't flinch. If anything, they fed the flames. Young members boasted openly in nightclubs, telling anyone who would listen that the Richardsons were finished. They flaunted their victory, replaying the attack like it was a badge of honor. The brutality of the concert ambush had elevated them from ambitious upstarts to real contenders in Glasgow's criminal landscape. Each taunt, each rumor, was carefully designed to needle their rivals into overreacting. The police, meanwhile, tried to calm the storm, but their efforts were little more than theater. They increased patrols in certain neighborhoods, spoke to witnesses who remembered nothing, and announced investigations that went nowhere. Detectives knew exactly what was happening. A feud was about to escalate into an all-out war, but without cooperation from terrified communities, their hands were tied. People on the streets lived by the code of silence, unwilling to risk becoming the next body in the river. As weeks passed, Glasgow braced itself. Everyone knew retaliation would come, and when it did, it wouldn't be in the shadows. Cars lingered outside houses too long. Strangers appeared in familiar bars. Business owners double-locked their doors at night, praying they wouldn't be caught in the crossfire. The city buzzed with tension. An invisible wire stretched tight and ready to snap. The attack at the Oasis concert had been more than an assault. it was a provocation. Now the Richardsons faced a choice: hit back hard enough to silence their enemies, or risk losing everything they had built. And in Glasgow's criminal world, hesitation was fatal. The streets whispered of blood yet to come, of nights when gunshots would replace music, and of a war that was only just beginning. In the weeks that followed, the Oasis concert attack became something larger than the event itself. It wasn't just a beating in the middle of a show, it was a story that took on a life of its own, retold in pubs, whispered in schools, and carried across Glasgow like an urban legend. Everyone seemed to know someone who had been there, though the details changed with every version. Some swore there were knives flashing under the stage lights, others claimed they saw guns, while a few insisted the attackers wore masks. The truth was already blurred, but that was part of the power. The attack had become a warning woven into the city's memory. For the ordinary fans, the night was remembered with unease. Many had gone home not fully understanding what they had witnessed, only realizing later that they had been caught in the middle of a gangland message. Parents spoke quietly about the violence, shielding their children from the worst of it. Those who had seen the blood or heard the screams rarely admitted it outside their closest circles. Nobody wanted to be connected to the story in any official way. The silence, as always, became a shield. For the Richardsons and TMJ, however, the concert marked a new stage in their war. It was no longer a hidden battle fought in alleys or behind shuttered doors. It had spilled into the heart of public life. If one man could be beaten and stabbed in front of thousands, then the boundaries of where violence could erupt no longer existed. Streets, clubs, even family homes could all become battlegrounds. The city felt it, that sense of uncertainty that came with knowing nowhere was truly safe. Retaliations came quietly but steadily. A car bomb outside a nightclub. A firebomb hurled through the window of a corner shop linked to TMJ. A young man found floating in the River Clyde, his body too damaged to hide the message written on it. None of these acts could be traced directly to the Richardsons, but everyone knew they were answers to the humiliation at the concert. Each act added fuel to the story, making the Oasis night seem like the opening chapter in something much bigger. As time passed, the attack transformed from news into folklore, spoken of with the same tone as other infamous moments in the city's underworld. It was remembered as a night when music and violence collided, when the roar of a crowd became cover for a brutal message. It reminded everyone that the drug war was not hidden in shadows but lived in the same streets, clubs, and events as ordinary life. The boundaries between normality and crime were paper-thin, and the concert was proof of it. Years later, people still spoke about it, not just as fans of Oasis but as witnesses to history. The concert was remembered not for the songs played, but for the blood spilled. The name of the Richardson associate lived on in whispers, and TMJ's reputation soared in its aftermath. For Glasgow, it became another scar, another reminder that the underworld never truly stayed underground. The concert wasn't just a performance, it was a warning, and in the eyes of the gangs, that warning still echoed, long after the music had stopped.